So we've had demand side since the beginning, over 10 years ago. The focus traditionally though was DSP integrations. We had DSPs on one side, publishers on the other, and that was really the extent of it. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, agencies started reaching out to, I think SSPs in general, PubMatic included, for private marketplace deals and things of that sort. So that's when our demand side started to take a little bit more of an agency-facing role. And in the last maybe 2 years, that's accelerated as agencies and even advertisers directly have reached out to PubMatic as well as other SSPs to better understand supply.
So tell us a little bit how that works, and how you work on that demand side, how you work with buyers and the agencies.
So with DSPs, it's a little bit more tactical. It's just making sure we have the best RTB connections, the best match rates on the current specs, and so it's a little bit more of a transactional relationship. Whereas on the agency side, we don't actually have a direct billing relationship typically with an agency. So in that case, it's a lot of education. So us letting them know what makes PubMatic unique, what we're doing to fight fraud, to increase inventory quality, adding transparency to the auction. But then it's also, in some cases, commercial agreements to give them advantages when it comes to take rate or curating inventory, just trying to understand their goals and then making sure the way that we're handling their auction helps them align those goals.
So how has the agency's approach changed to the supply side in the last 4 or 5 years?
I'd say 4 or 5 years ago, most agencies that I talked to were supply side agnostic. So the publishers made the decision of which SSP to use first and then second and so on in the waterfall. And then the DSP did the decisioning for the auction. So when header bidding maybe 2 years ago started to collapse that waterfall, then the publishers became largely SSP agnostic. And at that point, if the SSP is agnostic on the buy side and the publisher side, then no one cares in a sense. And so a lot of buyers and agencies specifically said, someone needs to care, this is dramatically impacting my campaigns. And so they started to take more ownership of that, and we saw a lot more RFIs, a lot more conversation with agencies.
Cool, and I wanted to ask you, as long as a buyer can reach the intended user at a competitive price, what does the path of that user really matter?
Yeah, so we actually get this question a lot. I'm reaching a user, it's on this URL. I would say in any industry, supply matters deeply. You would never have a car manufacturer not put a lot of due diligence into where they're buying their metal or their brakes or anything of that sort. And in this industry, we've looked at it as sort of everyone's created equal. And I think with the efforts of ads.txt and JSON.sellers and supply chain objects, those all exist because there's this realization that supply is not created equally. And that multiple hops is detrimental to certain campaigns. And so as these different technical efforts start to get underway, I think we're getting closer to actually having technical ways to enforce certain things in supply, but the bid stream's still largely people-based in that you can manipulate certain things and you have to trust your suppliers. And so I think that's been the single biggest change.
So what do you think the biggest single challenge is facing programmatic as it relates to supply?
A couple of years ago, I probably would have said transparency. I would have said transparency is the biggest challenge. But I do think those efforts I mentioned, like ads.txt, are helping in a big way with transparency. I'd say the biggest challenge I see now is actually understanding the attention of a user. So we've got a lot of sites that are essentially just out there to arbitrage by cheap clicks, show as many ad impressions as possible, and sometimes they look good on a performance basis, but they're not really giving a brand lift, they're not really driving value. And so I think the next step is once we can say, hey, we've got a transparent auction, we understand where the inventory is coming from and if it's direct or authorized or whatnot. The next step is then understanding where are users spending their time and their attention and where can we really drive value there. Because today it's just all kind of looked at as equally. Is it viewable? Is it not? Is it authorized? And you've just got different quality in the context of what a user is doing on a site.